This is episode 3 of the Casually Radical podcast, and I'm here with my lovely friend Wei.
Hi.
And we're going to talk mostly about identity and home, and we're just going to go with the flow a little bit and just see what interesting conversations come up. I feel like our conversations range from being super interesting and deep to being the most stupid things.
Fully unhinged.
Fully unhinged.
There are no hinged thoughts here.
It's basically just brain mush, and we're kind of, we're so we'll see what happens. But yeah, are you happy to just say a little bit about your background, who you are? We know each other from Edinburgh, but you've had a whole life before then.
I have.
And you've now had a whole life post Edinburgh, kind of. You're kind of living in Edinburgh, but kind of just everywhere. Yeah. So yeah, I'd love to hear more about that.
Okay. So, as Eloise said, we met 2024.
Yes.
I think 2024 in Edinburgh.
Yeah.
But I am American, and I grew up on the East Coast of the U.S., so in Jersey, then moved to California for a while because that's where I went to uni, then lived in the South, so I did East Coast, West Coast, American South, and then we moved to Edinburgh. But to go back to the beginning, I was adopted from Taiwan by 2 Asian parents, so they were Singaporean and Malaysian, and then brought to the U.S. when I was a baby. So I definitely am someone of the hyphenate culture, being Asian American, which is a very interesting intersectional identity to grow up with. And I think it definitely influenced my decision to leave the U.S. and sort of pursue a better future. Things got really sketchy over there post 2016, which was when I started university. It was 2016, graduated 2020. We all know how that went. And now my partner and I are just sort of following vibes, going on side quests. So we are in Hanoi, Vietnam, and also we'll be in Thailand for a bit. But yeah, that's sort of where we're at now.
And you can probably hear we're very much in Vietnam with all the the scooters passing by. So hopefully it kind of adds to the vibe and it's not distracting. But I think it's kind of cool. I think home is a really interesting kind of conversation because it's something I've kind of thought of a little bit, kind of moving around. But then your life is my story on crack. It's just even kind of, I guess maybe in the US it's really difficult right now because the US is maybe one of the main places you kind of consider home, or but then there's also what's going on kind of politically right now has kind of made you feel like you can't be there safely, and I'm sure a lot of other people in America also feel the same, that don't kind of fit into the straight white box that Donald Trump seems to be wanting America. So but then you kind of always say that America is the place of immigrants. Everybody is an immigrant apart from Native Americans in America. So it's it could be this place that's a kind of amazing multicultural kind of place that everybody could kind of feel safe and respected. And it's so sad that it's not that right now. So I guess my question is I'd just love to hear more about your identity with America, or how you feel about it, because you kind of have this love relationship with it, but then also it's not that straightforward currently.
Definitely. I feel like it really took me leaving the U.S. to really develop a perspective on it. Also, my frontal lobe developing, that was huge. Because I left when I was...
You felt it.
Literally 25, 26. Crazy time in a woman's life. But yeah, there was a huge story arc surrounding identity and home at the time that I left, because my mom had just passed, and my family was going through a lot. So it was just, I think my sense of identity was fractured in many ways, but I mean, it did feel violent in the sort of fracturing that happened. But I think what I realized and what I've realized now is it was sort of a breaking down that had to happen in order for me to construct the sense of identity that I have now that has made me feel safe to sort of be wherever I want to be. And I think the thing that I realized, like when I first came to Edinburgh, I was very much like, oh my God, like the US sucks. Like I hate it, like all of this stuff. And I think around like the first 4th of July that I spent outside of the US, I realized that what made me hate the US so much was because of how much I loved my country. And I think that there's really this almost like paradox that happens in the US that, like you were saying, like because of all the white supremacy and the racial tensions and the loss of rights in so many ways. I mean, I moved to the South in 2023 when Roe v. Wade was repealed, so I lost a lot of rights as a woman, so that was crazy. But on the flip side of all of this conflict, there's always a reactionary, vibrant subculture that arises, and I think we've moved into an era in the US where the subculture of immigrants and all these sort of the various diaspora of people who have either been driven from their home culture or where their families, where their lineage is from, or left willingly, like my parents did. It shifted into like, that is what makes you American. Like my parents very much did the American dream of searching for a better life. Like they came to the US with literally nothing and worked their way up and gave me a wonderful life. And it was really hard for me to leave, especially with like one thing that is, I think, pretty shared in the immigrant identity in the US is this feeling of being indebted to your parents because they sacrificed so much for us to be there. So it was very hard to sort of tell my parents, like, I'm gonna leave. But I think what made me feel like I was still adding to their story of creating a home was them agreeing that I should leave because they knew that all of the things that they were fighting for me to have just weren't really possible in the US anymore. They really saw it like after 2020 when it was really hard to get a job, like, you know, rent was going through the roof, cost of living was going through the roof. And I think that I was specifically sort of prepared to do this kind of thing simply because it was what my parents had done. So yeah, it's a very complex thing. And I think I've arrived at a place where I'm not always proud of my country, but I'm really proud to be an American. Like I couldn't see myself growing up anywhere else. Like the US is a country of immigrants. It was built on the backs of immigrants so many times. You know, African Americans quite literally like built our country when it was founded. And, you know, the wave of the layers of immigration that happened were different levels of development in our country. You know, like all the Chinese immigrants that came in to build the railroads and things like that. And I think it's just, there's so much conflict because there are so many groups living in close proximity. And I think one thing that's really cool about the US is that it was one of the first truly multicultural societies, not in the sense that like there weren't other places that had different cultures present, but I think the US was, and fact check me on this if I'm wrong, but the US was the first country that was founded on a base of values instead of race, ethnicity, or religion. So a lot of the conflict that we have is because I value freedom, individuality, and so does MAGA. You know, like it's really hard to, values are defined so differently depending on the person, and there are so many different type of people in the US that it makes it really hard to have one cookie cutter American identity. But I think that, you know, it is a country of immigrants, and I think that's what makes it so wonderful. I think that's why we have culture that is so resonant in other countries, because there's something that everybody can relate to, like in a sense.
Yeah, that sounds amazing, and like it kind of really provides like a richer picture of America the way you talk about it than, because what we see on the news right now, it's very white, it's very kind of like, there seems to be like a lot of anger, but I think you really portray America as also like a place of love, and like it kind of feels like there's some communities that are just like one big hug for everybody, and I think that's super cool, and definitely like I guess it kind of brings us on to our next topic, something that the UK lacks. As a white person, it's kind of bad, but I don't think I realised like how white the UK is, especially Edinburgh, until kind of like you hear it from like the perspective of someone of colour, where like, you know, it's like something that you've kind of found hard, like kind of moving to Edinburgh, like especially Scotland as well, is very white, and it feels like that's like the default a little bit, you know. And there's definitely like a lot of spaces that are kind of like becoming more and more for people of colour, that tends to be more people of colour are kind of creating them and trying to make space, but it's not kind of been as much this kind of like, it's kind of like we're trying to make like add inclusivity to like a base of whiteness, if that makes sense. I don't know, maybe I don't know if that's how you feel, but it feels a bit more like that might be the difference. But yeah, I want to hear more about like how you found kind of moving to Edinburgh, because I think Scottish people think quite highly of our country, and I love Scotland, and I think we kind of judge America for like this kind of like the very like outward racism that you kind of hear on the news. People are very loud about it, but I think what we miss or what we don't notice is the more slightly like subtle but very strong racism that's in Scotland, that maybe as a white person I don't kind of pick up, but then you felt super strongly, and it's super uncomfortable, and it's maybe something you kind of miss about being in America, where like you feel more comfortable being in America, but then in the UK there's always that slight discomfort. You were saying, so yeah, I hope that kind of I've kind of like slightly summarized what we've spoken about, but I kind of want to like hear it from your mouth as well.
No, that's so fair. It is something that's really hard to put into words, and I think what I'm still trying to figure out, so I've like really valued our conversations, because you're someone who, you know, comes from a very different background, but is very open-minded and receptive to having sort of a safe place to put words to these things. And I don't know, I do want to say first off that I love Scotland, and I think what is special about being there is that it is often forgotten that Scots, as well as the Irish, are an ancestral culture, like an ethnic group that was erased and colonized by the English. So I think Edinburgh was a very interesting place to land, because it is sort of really known as like very English. And I think that was the main culture shock that I faced there. I didn't quite realize until a few months in that I had never been in a colonizer country before. I'd always sort of only been in countries that were like, I don't know, obviously like the US has done a lot of colonization, but kind of like secondary, like it was colonized first.
Same with like when you spend time in New Zealand as well.
Exactly. So I've been to New Zealand, obviously Malaysia, Singapore, Taiwan, Australia. Like I hadn't really realized that those weren't, you know, the colonizer countries until I had been in so many white spaces in Edinburgh. Like even you would think with me living in the South that I would be in all white spaces, but you still, like, obviously there's less white people there. And I did grow up like in academia in a very privileged town in Princeton, but there it wasn't as much about race and more about class, and class defined as access to like education. So it was more privileged, but there were like a lot of different ethnicities present, a lot of like immigrants, like people's parents who had come to the US for jobs or things like that. So being in Edinburgh was the first time that I was sort of looking around and realizing I was in an all-white space. And then obviously being in California, which is like very Asian, it was quite a culture shock. And I feel like what I was most shocked by was the sort of like insidious, like underlying racism that happened. One thing that I noticed, I never got this from you, But when I first got
You're like about to out me, like
no, not you.
you do all the time. It's so racist.
Just roasting you on your podcast. No, but when I first got to Edinburgh, when Cam and I had kind of said like, oh, we're coming here, like, you know, because the U.S. isn't a very safe place for us right now. People felt so comfortable, like absolutely flaming the U.S. as people who had never been there or never lived there. And I was kind of like, it gave off insecurity, and insecurity from a place that Scotland is actually really similar to the U.S. in a lot of ways. The displaced Highlanders that I talked about were sent to the U.S., and actually like a huge portion of the groups that started the American Revolution, like they had already experienced taxation without representation in Scotland. You know, the English did it to them there, and then the English did it to everyone in the U.S. At the time of the American Revolution, there were no like Americans as we know it. It was just Europeans from all over that were all trying to figure out how to coexist and set up a new society. And I think that because of all of these different like ethnicities and groups existing together in the U.S., it kind of like accelerates social issues. They're just like more visible because it's like, you know, the Wild West, the New World. It was really up to people to form groups and sort of like chosen family to survive. I mean, that's what my parents did. Like, I feel like everything I know about friendships and intimacy and family comes from the chosen family that my parents built in order to make it. And that's why we have such rich sort of immigrant communities, because it is so hard to figure it out in the U.S. Like, I think the one thing that unites a lot of Americans on both sides of the political aisle is we just don't feel like the current system is made for us, the people. So that's something I hope that we can move together as a country, and something that I hope that the UK can sort of wake up to a little bit. I think what I noticed was missing in the US was the sort of reaction to needs. There is sort of a sense of complacency of like, oh, this is just like the way we do things, or oh, it's worse here, so like it's fine. And I don't, my hypothesis on where this comes from is again back to the American values of like America being a country founded by people who are searching for a better life, like they're making it for themselves, and then the values of like individualism and freedom, like this American ego that we deserve XYZ, which, you know, has its plus and minuses. But I think that when there is an issue in the US, it is typically talked about. One thing that I hear when I'm traveling is, oh, Americans are so loud and like opinionated and loud with their emotions. And I'm like, yes, because in our country, like you have to. Like everyone is allowed to have their own identity. Whereas the thing with a colonizer country is that there is a lack of culture because the British culture was built around the erasure of others. So there is this like reaction of like, just no, we're not that, instead of like, what are you? Like, what do you want to lean into? Rather than having all of these like laws that protect, how do you prevent, or how do you fill the gaps afterwards? But I do think, all of that being said, that the UK is in a really wonderful spot where it hasn't developed as much as the US in terms of the problems, but also the structures in place to solve those problems, which in the US, some are working, a lot are just falling apart. But I think it would be really great for the UK to look to a lot of the things that are happening in the US almost like as a case study, as being the parent country. The US, we've taken a lot of the same power structures like from the UK, so it would be useful to learn. And it is great, like it being less developed. I mean, like it's just smaller. Like it's been a wonderful place for communities to spring up, which is something that I really loved. Like in the UK, it seemed easier to start more intimate small groups and not have as much like...
People are craving it. People are kind of craving small groups, I think, as well. Like it's a kind of need that hasn't fully been fulfilled. And then when you broach a community, people are like, yes.
Yeah.
We didn't realize we were needing this fully, but now you're saying it,
Exactly.
we're like, hell yeah, let's go for it.
Yeah. And I think, you know, on this other side of like the loneliness epidemic that's happening and the recovery from COVID, all of these communities are springing up. And in Edinburgh, it feels like there's like a community for everything. My one take on it is that these places are really white. And it feels like it's like a hard thing to balance. Like my American identity, I feel like makes me very valid in being someone who can say like, this is what you need. Like this is what having more people of color can help you see, or like it can help widen your perspectives. And people don't overtly say this, but I very much get the sense of like, oh, we don't really need that.
Yeah.
And it's like, you might not need it yet, but maybe look to the US and see what happens if you only build in things later.
And also, like, sometimes you don't, I mean, I feel like we do need diversity because it just makes communities better and richer and more interesting, but it's also not about, like, needing it necessarily, but what is nurturing to the people, you know, like, kind of just having that kind of compassion and care and wanting to include people as well. Like, maybe sometimes it feels more objective when it's like you broach diversity inclusion and people are like, oh, but we don't need that to succeed. It's like, okay, but that's just like, you shouldn't look at things just as like monetizing and succeeding. It's also just like the right thing to do to kind of, you know, like if you're building a community, it should be open to everybody that wants to be part of it and stuff. And, you know, there's that kind of like, oh, do we need to do this? No. Okay, we won't bother. Just seems really iffy, you know. It's like it should be so much more than that as well, for sure. And it's like I was very shocked by people not knowing what DEI was, when that's like something that's drilled into your head as an American in any sort of group that you're a part of, whether that's school or a job or a community. Like DEI is front and center. So that was like very much a culture shock, but I feel like, because I like Scotland, like we do have our own kind of like story of suffering as well, and I think there's also this kind of narrative where, like, you know, Scotland, we kind of hate the English as well, and I think there is so much relevance to that. But I think Scotland, especially when you're talking about like how Scottish people react to Americans as well, like, oh, like kind of like judging America, kind of being quite harsh in the way that maybe they kind of question you about America and about the politics. But I think it's always good to remember that Scotland, we're not like the innocent, perfect nation as well. Like especially Edinburgh is like built on the money from the slave trade. And I think, because even in my education, like in history class, when we were taught about the slave trade, it was mostly kind of centered a bit around kind of England and London, but mostly like America's role in the slave trade as well. And I think this has kind of built this narrative of like Scotland being quite just like a little innocent country as well. And, you know, it's kind of hard for me to kind of like say that, because also sometimes I feel like bad criticizing Scotland, because that one becomes into my own identity, being kind of like from English parents and English background, even though I feel very Scottish. I was born and raised in Scotland, but you know, it's hard for me to maybe sometimes criticize Scotland as an English person. I've definitely had to kind of rethink my my definition of international, because Edinburgh is very European international or very white international. So you'll be walking around the streets and you'll hear like so many different languages, and it's also so accessible to the rest of the world with like the airport and everything. But then kind of especially from like hearing your perspective, I definitely notice now how often we're in spaces where you're like the only person of color. And I'm just like, holy fuck. Like, it's kind of like I've just like had like this kind of like lens taken off, and I'm just like, this is crazy. And I think it also was really interesting. Like, obviously I can never like fully know your experience, but I think it was really interesting you describing your experience to be a bit similar to how you feel when you're the only woman in the room of men. And that was like really like quite helpful to kind of hear and like understand, because I remember I used to work in a tech company and I was often the only woman in the room, and it's kind of like even if you're in a room of lovely men that are like, you feel comfortable around, you still just have this feeling like something feels a bit off and uncomfortable. And I think that, that was like something that I then kind of was like, okay, that must be so hard to kind of, because I'm rarely just in a room full of men.
Yeah.
Because, I'm in quite a lot of spaces with women. But then you're pretty much always, in a room full of men, but in terms of kind of like white people instead. And so just kind of carrying around this slight like discomfort where you're like, even if you're in like a space where, everybody seems really lovely and welcoming, it's just not quite fully there. And I think that's really good in terms of like diversity and inclusion, or diversity and equity. You say is like something to consider, where it's like you can host like an event in a community and you can say like, that everybody's welcome, but if it's then a space where it tends to just be kind of just white people, then maybe a person of color, even if the community sounds amazing, like it might be a little bit deterring just because there's that slight discomfort as well, which I think is really important to think, because it can often be a bit of a tick box exercise. Like people are like, oh well, we're not excluding anybody, we're not doing anything wrong, we're not like, we're not saying a person of color can't join our community, so what's the problem? But it's so much more nuanced than that as well. And I think that's something really to think about, especially in Edinburgh, where there's so many, it's kind of like there needs to be maybe more action, because I think it's a bit more passive. Like some of the events we go to, like, or that we hold, it's like with That's So Fruity as well. Like I think, it's one thing to just kind of create an inclusive space, but it's another to actively try and kind of make people feel uncomfortable and make it more diverse. And I think it's something that most people just don't think about as it being like an action or like an actual thought. It's more like a passive thing. It's like, oh, we're not doing anything wrong, but there's no like big incentive to actually put in the extra effort to make it a truly inclusive space. So I think that's something that's worth exploring. I'm kind of curious though, like, because if you were to kind of give some advice to like someone organizing an event, what would be maybe like one piece of advice, if you don't mind me using your free consulting? You're also available for paid consulting. Yeah. Anybody who's watching this.
I do organize a lot of events.
Yeah, you do organize a lot of events. But what would be kind of like, I don't know, like a perspective shift to kind of actually really include people of color in events? Like how could, if you were kind of wanting to hold an event, or even just like in the workplace, kind of getting people to apply for the role, like how could you maybe actively make something more inclusive, especially in a slightly more white city like in Europe, for example, Edinburgh?
I have to think on that for a second, so I'll start verbally processing. To start off, my ethos to be able to speak on this is I have been in multiple leadership or facilitation roles for various communities, holding events. Also someone who has been like in a sort of educator, if that makes sense, for leadership roles on how to let your services reach the people who need them the most. And then again, growing up in the U.S. and in diverse areas has given me quite an exposure to sort of just a diversity of backgrounds, because I do think that race and class equalize in a lot of spaces. When it comes to trying to make things more welcoming, I think it's a really fine line to walk, because you don't want to seem like you're like marketing to minority groups as like have you heard of the term like a diversity hire?
Yeah.
So that kind of thing. But I think my sort of take on it, like building off of what I just said about race and class equalizing, is I think it's that. I think we can take race out of the conversation without ignoring it by sort of treating people as people. I think it's something you need to keep in mind. Like, for example, if you have a panel of speakers and all of your speakers are men, and your population of, your audience is women as well, you wouldn't want your panel to be all men. You know what I mean? Same thing applies for race. So I think what's great about Edinburgh is there are a lot of communities that are able to translate high value for low cost, because a lot of people are willing to sort of pitch in and donate because they are smaller communities. I think that that's a really great sweet spot to be able to target minorities, because of access is sort of equalized when you have high value, more free communities. So I would love to see, like, even on people's Instagram pages, I have been in a community where I know that it's not an all-white community. I've seen people of color there. Why do I not see any of them on your Instagram page? That's insane to me. I mean, like, I was in a sorority in the U.S. First year was 2016. And that was sort of, I'm not sure if this is completely correct, but there was a big wave of more awareness of the need for diversity in this era of sororities, because they were, historically quite white. But the reasons why sororities were founded in the U.S. was because it was when women were first accepted into colleges, and so it was all men. So they needed somewhere to be able to feel safe and supported and collaborate and share resources. And at a school like mine, which was extremely academically challenging, a lot of people joined sororities for that same reason. And I was very aware when I was, first year in college of, we all went through all the Instagram pages. That's where they do a lot of their sort of marketing to people who want to join. That's how you present yourself. Same way that a brand does, right, on Instagram. And I think around this time there was a lot more awareness of how you represent yourself online because of the social media boom. Obviously, it developed past the point where it was just very widely used at the time. And I know a lot of people speak of 2016 as the golden era, or the sort of the tail end of the golden era of social media. But there were a lot of girls around me who did it, not simply non-white girls, but girls who would look at a chapter and be like, all the girls on their page are white. I don't want to be like that. And it's so interesting to me because at the time, my dad had wanted me to transfer schools to a big Southern school, Vanderbilt, because that's where he taught. I was at UC San Diego. And at the Southern sororities are a lot more traditional. They're very intense and typically quite white. And so I looked at my chapter's Instagram page, and it was pretty much all blonde girls. So I was like, I don't think I want to transfer. I want to stay here. A few years later, I looked on their Instagram, and it was very diverse. So there was a huge shift towards this representation. And I think that if you really are serving everyone and you are a welcoming community, the proof will be in the pudding of who is at your events. And I think just having a little bit more awareness of representing your audience is helpful, and I haven't quite seen any big problems with sort of language of any businesses I know. However, I will say that I didn't really understand racism until I came to Scotland. And it wasn't to preface, again, I was in very diverse areas. The first time I felt like I actually experienced outright racism was post-2020. And I remember there was an incident where someone was racist towards me, and I thought it was just a man yelling at me, and I called my therapist about it, crying, and she was like, it's because he was racist. And I was like, what do you mean? She was like, what he said was very much within the context of, it was a COVID virus, racist, because, there's a lot of racism against Asians. And that was really the first time I had actually experienced that, not because people didn't say racist jokes growing up. I think in the era that I grew up with social media being sort of new, there was a lot of racist jokes. There was that era that all the social media people were getting canceled for because of the stuff they said in the 2010s. People were quite racist. But growing up in New Jersey, it was okay, the Chinese kid would get bullied by the German kid for being Asian, but then the German kid would be bullied by like the American for being German, who would bully like the Indian kid, who would that, you know what I mean? Like it was like equalized. Yeah, exactly. So it wasn't like, to me, I never like really felt like it was racism directed specifically at me for who I was. It was just
feel like othered as much, would you say?
I will say there was some. I did feel othered in the sense that I wasn't white American. I think at the time it was very much like beauty standard was typical, like blonde hair, blue eyes. When I went to California, was a huge culture shock for me because in most of California the beauty standard is Asian. That was like such a shock to me. That was really crazy.
Like the way people act around you maybe changed a bit. Like if they were kind of like romantically interested, like you know. I feel like you kind of said that it was like such a difference. Like people were kind of suddenly like, you know, obsessed with you, and you're like, oh,
it's just like hello. And it made me realize it's not that people like weren't into me before, but I had always had this internal narrative of like, oh, but they're always going to pick a white girl over me, kind of thing. And then seeing it completely inverted on the West Coast, and some of my friends who were like just traditionally like the American standards, so like blonde hair, blue eyes, like stunning, they were having insecurities about people calling them a basic blonde and like men not being interested in them because they didn't fit the beauty standard of being Asian. And I was like, how is this happening? No matter where you end up, you're not going to be good enough. Like, and I feel like that is something really interesting about the U.S. is that like I said about comparing both sides of the aisle, it's a lot of similar struggles, but in different flavors. But then coming to the UK, a lot of microaggressions that I was kind of like jaded about when I first got there because I was so sort of like disoriented from everything I'd gone through. Really grateful to be in the UK after feeling so like hopeless in the US. I think it gave me like sort of rose tinted glasses, and I would sort of mention microaggressions to my friends that happened, not as microaggressions, but like, oh, this thing happened to me. It made me feel kind of weird. And, you know, in those situations, I would sort of like laugh something off, and they would be like, wait, what the fuck? Like, if I was there, like, they would get clocked. Like, they would get fully canceled in the US if that happened. And I remember there was like a story that I told you after I had spoken to one of my friends that I hadn't realized that was like actually like really racist. And I said it to you and you were like, wow, that's something that like people say a lot here. And I was like, yeah, that's insane. That's so crazy to me. So it's just a very different culture. And I feel like in the US, part of the American identity of being opinionated and everyone being able to have, like, you can sit at a table with someone, and obviously this is going to vary depending on the group of people you're around. I've been very privileged to be around educated, progressive people, empathetic people, but I can be like, this is what I believe, and the other person will be like, oh, I don't believe that at all. That's interesting. Like, why? Or we can fully have an argument about it, but leave not thinking that the other person is less American than you. It's just like base level expectation that Americans are so different. Whereas in the UK, it's like, you're different. Like that's crazy that you think that way. Which I'm like, okay, sure, like whatever. So it's definitely made me understand my American identity a lot more. I will say, like, despite all of this, the reason why I do see Edinburgh like as a home for me is I feel like it's made me interact with my American identity in so many ways. And I do really think that there's so many parallels between Scottish people and American people. And I say this a lot, like I feel like why you get along so well with us and you have a lot of international friends is you also have a hyphenate identity, being British and Scottish, but living in Scotland, you know, a country that has had such a complicated past with their colonizers, but that colonization has been erased in a lot of ways. And then even within Scotland, you're in a city that is even more towards the colonization side, but it's also a lot more international than, I don't know, maybe other places in England other than London, obviously. So it's kind of this sense of like, when I've talked to my friends who are like you, who are like Scottish English, this kind of like, oh, I don't really know what I am. Like, I'm not fully English, not fully Scottish, but I just like to surround myself with people who treat me like a person.
Yeah.
And I feel like these people tend to have more diverse friends.
Yeah.
So that's what I really love. Like, I feel like Scotland is not, or Edinburgh is not somewhere where I could fully feel at rest and comfortable, but I also kind of like that because it challenges me in a lot of ways, and the people that I've surrounded myself with there are all like mirrors for my identity, whether it's a mirror that makes you really be like, whoa, I did not see myself that way. I actually feel a lot more stronger, or a lot like more confident in this part of my identity because you've challenged me. Like, maybe you see me as something I'm not, and I've been given a chance because you see me as a person, because you care about me as a person, to educate you on what is different. Like, I find it so healing, our conversations where you're like, wow, I've never really thought about it that way, because, you know, like, the plight of a person of color in the US is having to educate white people about their whiteness. But I think there's like a level of, like, I always believe that people should be given a chance. Like, I'm not going to go around like giving handouts, you know what I mean? But I want to give you the best chance to be an elite white, because your job is to educate the whites. That's not my job, but it's your job.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I love that. And I think that was like, I quite liked how you kind of like, because like I also do kind of struggle with identity, and I feel like it feels weird to say that because I'm basically just British. You know, like my whole family are mostly English, a little bit of Irish, a little bit of Welsh, tiny bit of Scottish. But because there's kind of this like, kind of like, we kind of have like a kind of internal battle in the UK where we're all kind of like, we're like a kind of like an unhappy family, I would say, the UK is where we all kind of hate each other, you know, like.
Kind of the same in the US too, though.
Yeah.
Really the same.
Yeah, it feels kind of like the kind of like the states kind of disagreeing with each other, because it is hard to put, like, especially in the US, like, it's such a huge country, like you kind of say, to please everybody is crazy when there's so much diversity. And like, obviously the UK is a smaller country, but we still have like lots of different kind of like backgrounds and cultural differences. And yeah, I think that is something, like, that was kind of a realization about myself that I just had, like, when you were kind of saying about that, is like, because I have always been someone that has like moved, at least in my adult life, moved towards like the international communities. I had this like need to escape from Scotland, and then because Europe is closer, you know, then kind of like anywhere else, I've definitely kind of gravitated towards like Europe, and all my friends are European. It's only recently that I've kind of realized I want to kind of broaden my horizons and kind of like travel like in Asia and like really get to know like different cultures, because Europe, it's still like close to me culturally, you know what I mean? And it's still comfortable, you know, it's still you know, and yeah, I've loved that about kind of like traveling to Asia, and I really want to kind of do more traveling and kind of like broaden my horizons, because I think so far my internationalness has more been just kind of like, so I feel a bit more comfortable, but less so to kind of like get me out of my comfort zone and broaden my horizons, if that kind of makes sense. And for example, like being here in Vietnam, like there's been so many times where like, or there's been a few times at least where maybe I've been like the only white person in like a room, and I think that's so important for white people to kind of experience it, like, okay, we're not the default, because I think subconsciously I've grown up learning that whiteness is the default, and it's not that I all agree with it, but it's just this probably subconscious thought that most white people, especially in the UK, have of like, okay, most people are white's the default, people like people of color are other. And I've not, like, I think hopefully most people, white people, don't like kind of think it in a bad way, like, oh, like if you're not white it's wrong, but it's just this kind of like, I don't know, like slight like audacity that we're kind of taught, where it's just like audacity. Yeah, it really is, you know. And I think also being taught that like the UK is the greatest, strongest nation, you know, all these things, you know, even when I was coming to Vietnam, people like in my family being really, really worried about my safety, and or like to Thailand, and I kind of had this like fear of Asian countries, because I'm like, you know, maybe having this impression that the UK is like super developed and like any other kind of country where like whiteness isn't the default is underdeveloped. And then I arrived here and I'm like, this is like, we are behind. Yeah, exactly. Like there's so many parts in Southeast Asia that I'm like, well, that's smart. That's cool. And I've also like never felt like safer as well than in like Thailand. Like as a woman, like I feel like the respect towards like women and the openness that people have in Southeast Asia has just been like amazing. And I kind of feel so embarrassed that I had these, like this kind of fear of coming here as well. So I think this is kind of been my growth edge, where I think being kind of like Miss International traveling around Europe has been more like just me trying to sort out some kind of identity and kind of feeling of home, where I maybe am a bit more accepted for not being like super Scottish. Yeah. But it's definitely missed out in my kind of like, you know, struggle for identity. I've not really considered like broadening my horizons that much, you know, and I think this is, yeah. So yeah, I don't know if that makes sense, but I think that was like a thought that kind of just like came when you were saying that I was like, yeah, it's so true. Like I think that's why I've definitely like gravitated towards like more international people, because there is that slight acceptance where international spaces just see people as humans as well, and that is like super refreshing. And I think also just people that are more like open-minded and international tend to just be people that I get along with better as well. And it's just, you know, and I think maybe also we've kind of found, because we both found each other in a queer group as well, because we're both queer women. And, you know, these groups tend to attract people that are also kind of more open-minded, because they've had their own struggle with identity, if not through race, through sexuality, through gender as well, and people that have kind of been put in a place to kind of think about like identity, perhaps have compassion to other people that are from different backgrounds as well, which I think is really nice. So yeah, I kind of love the communities, but I think it is easy, I think in the UK, maybe in other places as well, to like slightly live in a vacuum as well, because you kind of want to just like surround yourself with people that make you feel welcome. And then I always forget that there are so many like racist assholes in the UK, you know, until we have an election, and I'm like until we voted for Brexit, then I'm like, holy shit, because Brexit is like rooted for sure in racism for at least most people that kind of voted. It's that kind of anti-immigration, and that was like super shocking as well when Brexit passed. I was like, whoa, like I feel like I was looking around being like, who voted for this?
Same thing with Trump too.
Yeah,
like people didn't think that Trump was going to be elected. I mean, I didn't. And I remember when I was talking to my dad about it, because that was the first year I could vote. Lovely. And I was talking to my dad about it. He was like, there's no way Trump's going to get elected. Like, and it was the same
I was so
thing.
surprised as well. Yeah.
And I think the difference in the timelines between the UK and the US, because now we've come back around with Zohran Mamdani being elected and this sort of new wave of inclusivity. I don't want to say like liberalism, because a lot of people like me are very disappointed on both sides of the aisle, but it's just a socialism is what's happening. But I think why this sort of progress was accelerated in the US is all of the conflict that accelerated it. And I think, to build off of what you were saying, is living on the sidelines or being othered, being marginalized, gives you a sense of empathy. And why it helps you empathize across like all different groups is there's only a very, very small homogenous minority that is not othered. So when you are not that, you all of a sudden are put in the same boat with so many different types of people. And these are the people that I think are most qualified to lead. Like, if you are trying to create policy, create change that affects the whole world, you can't do that from a little glass bubble. You know what I mean? I think the thing that most people say when they're frustrated with leaders are like, oh my God, they just need to touch grass, you know? And I think that perhaps the next frontier in the UK is a struggle that I do see with whiteness, is how do you react when the problem doesn't directly affect you? I think that's literally empathy. You know what I mean? Stepping into other people's shoes. And I think because the UK is so white, people are very comfortable with not considering people who aren't of their same categories and in all different types of categories. And like you said, like in a queer community, I feel like being part of that community was crucial and absolutely central to me feeling like Edinburgh was a home for me. And in that sense, the UK being like less developed was actually, it felt a lot safer. Like I felt like perhaps why I didn't come out in the US is that everyone is so loud about their identities that I felt a lot of pressure to pick sort of predetermined categories, and I just wasn't sure. And so I had a little bit more space to do that in a city like Edinburgh where like everyone says like the whole city is queer. You know what I mean? And it's not like in your face. Queer, there's no like strip of gay bars really. We are really lacking in the gay nightlife scene, so Edinburgh needs to get on that.
But then there are so many just like cafes with like the pride flag or just kind of like little, like it's more subtle but it feels more normalized. It kind of almost in a way like I don't know if this could be a good or a bad thing, but like you said, like it feels like everybody's gay. So if you're kind of like, oh, I'm like, here's my girlfriend, people are like, nice. Like it's normal, you know? I mean, maybe that also might be the bubble that I live in Edinburgh, but it does feel a bit like less of a big deal, which could be good and bad because sometimes it's great to want to sing from the rooftops about your identity and be proud of it. And I think we're not that kind of city, but I think Edinburgh does feel a bit more like, you know, just kind of it's normal to be like a little bit different and, you know, I hope that's the full of Edinburgh, not just the little space that I live in, you know.
No, I think so. And I think that sort of the laid back culture of Edinburgh is like definitely one of its strengths. I think that Edinburgh, the sort of international scene, is a lot of people who are there for intellectual academic purposes. So it is somewhere that's very creative. And I think creativity goes hand in hand with queerness as well as intersectionality on a race ethnicity basis, because what we were talking about with the hyphenated identity is that does come with an erasure. Because by being a little bit of both, you are also neither as well, and you have to create this new sort of identity. Like my identity as Asian American in so many ways overlaps with the Asian American identity in general, but I also have things that make me very different. You know what I mean? Like a lot of people around me growing up who were Asian American were specifically Chinese American. There's a saying ABC, American born Chinese. I was not that. I was born in Taiwan. My first language was not English, but because my parents were from Malaysia, Singapore, which speak English because they were colonized by the British, English became my main language. And so I didn't have the same language touch points as other American Asians. And then even like going to California, everyone says that like Asians there are quite white. I also didn't share that as much either. I didn't share the confidence that comes with growing up around like everyone looking like you, because there's literally so many Asians there. Like when I was there, I just didn't think about my race at all. So it was quite a shock once I left to then be like reintroduced to my identity. So it's a complicated thing. I really do think that like even if perhaps your intentions aren't completely like aligned or like they're not as progressed as we might want, sometimes like going through the motion, like having a DEI sort of policies like in place will at least open up the door for development in that area. But altogether being like, oh, we don't really need that, like is in 2025 about to be 2026, that's insane. You know what I mean? Like I feel like for queerness, adding the dimension of race to that really can add so much to the conversation about negotiating identity, having the confidence to say that you are something else, relying on community. Like that's something that immigrants have not been able to acclimate or integrate without having relied on community. There are a lot of freelancers in Edinburgh, like we're part of a freelancing community. Some of the best people to learn from of how to operate outside the typical institutions of work, immigrants. They were the ones who really had to hack it and rely on communities. In creative and intellectual circles, you're always looking for inspiration. Like, the whole point is to figure out how to create bridges, as well as in those areas, translation being power. Talking about before, who wrote the history books. Like you were saying, that in the world that you grew up in, it was very much like Western culture is dominant. That's like less than half of the world. You know what I mean? If you think about how many Asians are out there, there are a lot more of them than there are white people, and Asian history is deep, and there's a lot of colonization and violence within that sphere as well. So when you have people of different backgrounds, or you go out and travel, it just deepens perspective so much more. And as we're moving into this era of authenticity and of trying to reconnect with each other amidst the sort of dissolution of our traditional institutions, I think it's more important than ever to be having these conversations and to be learning from the people who have been doing it for so long, usually, behind the scenes. But again, like, I really feel like the U.S. is at the forefront of bringing all of this to the surface. But yeah, we're just in this new era of, like, we get to decide for ourselves who we are, and I think that's something I'm doing. So that's something you're doing in your own way, and I think that being able to come together and share those and find the things that still connect us is, like, that's the whole point. That's a whole damn point. It's something that we need to do in this era where, like, so many people's identities are being challenged, whether that be social climate, political climate, wars, AI, like, is making people trying to find what it means to be human. So we have to inherently talk about what connects us all. So,
definitely. And I think this kind of feeling of connection is something that kind of frustrates me about the world, because I think it could just be so simple. But for example, when I see, like, so many women that are supporting Donald Trump, I'm just like, well, first of all, it doesn't make sense as a woman, because you're getting so many rights potentially taken away from you. But there's also, like, this kind of, like, you can kind of have this sense of compassion, like kind of how we spoke about, of like I don't know what it's like to be a person of color, and I never will fully, but it can kind of be emotionally kind of explained to me in this kind of, like, well, as a woman, I have struggles in the world, so I can kind of imagine like a kind of similar situation as well, like kind of how you say about, like, being the only woman in a room full of men, being the only person of color in a room full of white people. Like, it's not the same, but I have the emotional kind of knowledge of one situation to then kind of imagine it. Because I think when you get involved emotionally, that kind of brings you to kind of, like, have something stick in your mind a bit more. Because if you speak to a white man about diversity and inclusion and equity, like, there's so many white men that I love, and a lot of white men really try and understand, but I feel like a lot of the time when I speak to them, I can't, like, find anything that they can kind of understand, like, emotionally. It's more like, okay, they understand it's hard, but then they just usually move on with their day without kind of it sitting with them that much, because they've not had much struggle in this way to then be able to translate it into, like, another person's kind of problems as well. But then I kind of find I'm just like, with women, I'm like, well, you struggle in the world, you walk down the street with the potential of being, like, really horrible, like something really horrible happening to you, and there's that, like, I think every woman knows that fear of walking alone in a dark street. So then why can you not imagine that same fear that maybe, like, a queer person has, like, if they're holding their partner's hand, that fear of being, like, harassed as well, or a person of color, like, that kind of same, like, fear of being harmed because of who they are. Like, it really frustrates me that, like, these communities sometimes can't, like, join together and kind of see each other's perspectives as well. And I think when it does happen, that's so beautiful, because we can kind of, there's kind of, like, this community and shared suffering as well. And don't get me wrong, there are so many white men that, like your partner as well,
Yeah, I am with a white man.
That really try, but so I'm not blaming them or excusing them, but I think I'm just like,
do better.
Just do better. Everybody can do better. And but I think there can be something so amazing about, like, these community spaces that kind of understand each other, even though we're from different backgrounds and different perspectives. That's that kind of understanding and shared compassion and the kind of same urge to want just a better world for everybody. That sometimes people miss, and I'm just like, why? Like, you understand, you're so close to understanding it, but then you're just missing it a little. But yeah, anyway, it's getting kind of dark. Is there anything else that you want to kind of put out there?
I don't know. I will say, I think that, to me, intelligence comes in a lot of forms. But broadly, I do think that I define intelligence as one's capacity to think beyond the limits of their own lived experience. I think I talk about a lot the difference between academics and scholars. Academics are learning a wide body of knowledge, and more than anything, they are regurgitating. Scholars are taking that wide body of knowledge and knowing it so well that they know how to add to it. They're creating something new. I think that's why creativity is like at the core of all of this, I think it goes hand in hand with empathy, and it is the driving force, it should be the driving force behind like intellectual sort of intelligence of wanting to create something that didn't exist before. Like, that's how we've evolved as humans. And so many different things go into creativity. It's not simply like the humanities and all that kind of stuff. It's like it takes every aspect of your life. And I mean, the most successful creatives are the ones who are consuming the most, like art, books, experiences. So I think that creativity is something that we can all, as humans, relate to, because we all are creations ourselves. Like, somebody brought each of us into existence. Like, that's something that we all share. So hopefully we see more of that in this next era of whatever happens next. But yeah.
Also, I feel like I'm so intellectually crushing on you right now. I'm just like,
That's the whole
I'm
point.
like, wow.
Welcome to our date.
Yeah. But no, I think that's like such a good take home, and I think like there's so many resources out there as well, because I think it can be tiring for people of color to constantly be educating white people, but then there are so many kind of like books and perspectives to kind of like to also consume if you're a white person wanting to learn more
And when
as well.
you're educated, you are, what I say about my partner is he's not the white savior, he's the white saved. So I was like, I just came in and seasoned you, and like I'm just cooking you fully, and it's your job to be the delicious meal, like consumed by others. And that's how change happens. It's like ripples that turn into waves. So.
Yeah, definitely. There needs to be slightly more anger from people about like other people's suffering as well.
You can be my anger translator, because it is, people of color were always fighting the angry person of color stereotype. But white people have this privilege to say and do whatever the hell they want. And y'all have like seats at tables that we will never have access to. So use that privilege to do whatever you want, but do it ethically and in an informed way. And most importantly, that differentiation between white savior and white saved is accountability. Make sure that you are telling the stories that need to be heard, but saying where those stories come from. So like not plagiarizing. So like giving like credit to the people who struggled so that you don't have to. The same reason why like America was built on the backs of immigrants. Like immigrants struggled so that America could be the greatest country, whatever, and associated with white people. It's just about storytelling and doing so ethically, which is all of my bit. So
Definitely. I love that. Thank you so much. I think that's so much like food for thought. I always
seasoned.
Yes, seasoned food for thought. I feel very seasoned. Cool. Okay, I think that's a wrap. I love it. I think we had such good conversations. We're now sitting in the dark, so I feel like we need to.
Yeah, it's time to go.
Yeah, and I need to sort myself out because I've got a flight soon.
Yeah. Oh man.
So yeah, I'm leaving.
Love you.
No, love you too. No. And thank you so much for being on my podcast. And yes, and I'm excited to be on your podcast as well. So that's going to be
Soft launch. You're gonna have to be a bit patient.
Yeah.
but-
Yeah. Watch this space.
Yeah.